Hello, dear friends. Welcome to everyone joining this live broadcast. Today, I'm talking about a topic many people find confusing, iron and ferritin. Why did I decide to do a live session on this? Because when people send me the lab results for consultation, ferritin shows up in almost every test. And wherever you look, online or clinics, in social media, you constantly hear the same phrases: low ferritin, iron deficiency, you must take iron. The problem is that a large number of people start taking iron without understanding what it is, how it works, or the risk. Iron is not a harmless vitamin. In excessive doses or when taken without a real medical indication, it can cause harm, and the liver is one of the organs that may suffer. And ferritin is not the only lab test that has become part of the big commercial industry. Another major example is vitamin D. What I'm seeing, how is that vitamin D topic is slowly becoming less dramatic, because over the last years we accumulated a lot of high quality research showing something important. Yes, vitamin D deficiency exists, especially in specific risk groups, but the idea that almost everyone is deficient and must be tested and supplemented has been greatly overstated. Still, vitamin D testing continues on a massive scale, and so does supplementation, partly because it has become a huge market. If you're interested, I can make a separate video about vitamin D. Please like this broadcast, support the channel, and leave comments, and I'll continue the vitamin D topic in another episode. Before vitamin D, many of you probably remember the vitamin C had its golden era. It was promoted almost as a miracle solution, including by very famous public figures. We can talk about that too, but today, even so, vitamin C is still sold everywhere. It doesn't dominate public fear the way vitamin D and ferritin do. And historically, there have been many other panaceas popularized by charismatic people, sometimes driven by money, sometimes driven by fear of aging. And this is where we are now. Ferritin testing and iron supplementation have become a kind of bottomless gold mine. When I consult women, and conversation often sounds like this: my doctor said I have an iron deficiency because I'm tired, weak, dizzy. And then comes a list of symptoms that in reality are not specific. They say symptoms can appear in dozens and sometimes hundreds of different conditions. So the big question is, why is the conclusion so often immediately iron? This is exactly why I decided to write my book, The Ferritin Trap. It's finished and currently being edited in English. I will also translate in other languages. The key point is that the core work is done. I went deep into the foundation: what iron is, how iron metabolism works, what forms of iron exist in the body, what anemia actually means, and how ferritin became such a powerful medical trend. So if this topic interests you, watch for announcements when the book is published. It will not be only in English, and it will be soon, because modern tools allowed us to publish and distribute books much faster than before. But today I'll cover what I can in this 30-40 minutes, at least the essentials, so you understand why these myths and fear-based narratives emerged. You probably heard this phrase many times: ferritin shows your iron stores. And that is exactly when the problem begins. Serum ferritin is not a simple storage meter. Ferritin is a protein that mainly exists inside cells. A small amount appears in the bloodstream, and that blood level can change for many reasons, not only because of iron. So when people repeat ferritin equals iron stores, it becomes a simplified statement that can be misleading in real clinical life. Another point that is frequently misunderstood is this: ferritin itself does not carry oxygen and does not create hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a molecule that carries oxygen through the body. Ferritin is not hemoglobin. It is not an oxygen transporter. That's why when someone tells me I was diagnosed with hidden anemia because my ferritin is low, I always look at the full picture. Hemoglobin, red blood cells, indices, and other markers that actually help us understand whether anemia exists and what kind of it might be. Very often the results are completely normal, there is no anemia. And then I hear, but I feel weak, dizzy, exhausted. Yes, the thyroid problems can do that, stress can do that, sleep deprivation can do that, anxiety can do that, even the weather can do that. Today, for example, the weather is heavy, gray skies, rain, wind, cold, and many people feel sleepy or low energy. Even my pets. Should we immediately blame ferritin, iron, or vitamin D? Not necessary. So let's put a few basic pieces in place. Iron ferrum is element number 26 in the periodic table. In the human body, it matters for many reasons, but two key forms are especially important. The first is hemoglobin. It carries oxygen from the lungs through the blood to tissues. The second is myoglobin. It helps store and use oxygen inside muscles. That's one reason muscles tissue look red. Iron is also involved in many enzyme systems, energy production, immune function, and brain activity. But there is a critical part. Iron is tightly controlled because free iron is chemically reactive and can damage tissues. That's why in the body, iron is normally bound to proteins. Several key proteins are involved in iron balance. Transferrin transports iron in the bloodstream. Ferritin and hemosiderin are storage-related forms mainly inside cells. Ferroportin is a cellular export gate. It allows iron to leave cells and enter the bloodstream. And hepcidin is the main regulator of how much iron is absorbed and how much is released from storage. A lot of public advice about iron is oversimplified. One is the most important reality is this: the body has very limited ways to get rid of excess iron. And most of our iron needs are met through recycling, not through daily intake. Red blood cells live about 120 days. They are constantly broken down and replaced. When hemoglobin is broken down, iron is reclaimed and reused. In broad terms, the body recycles roughly 20-25 milligrams of iron per day, while only about 1-2 milligram is absorbed from food in the intestine, mainly in the duodenum. For most healthy people, that is enough. So when people become obsessed with the daily iron numbers, it is important to understand that iron metabolism is not like calcium or sodium. Iron works differently. And this is also why more iron is not automatically good, because iron is not easily eliminated. Too much iron can accumulate. In hereditary hemochromatosis, for example, iron can accumulate in the liver, heart, pancreas, and joints, causing significant damage. This is where hepcidin matters. Hepcidin is a small protein produced mainly by the liver and acts as a main regulator of iron balance in the body. If iron metabolism had a traffic controller, that would be hepcidin. When hepcidin is low, absorption can increase and iron overload becomes more likely in certain conditions. When hepcidin is high, iron can be locked away in storage and unavailable for use. This is often called functional iron deficiency, and it can happen in inflammation and chronic disease. That's why ferritin alone is not enough to evaluate iron status. A proper assessment may include a broader panel, for example, transferrin saturation or other iron indices, and most importantly, the clinical context. Now, ferritin is not just a protein with iron. Its structure is remarkable, and this is the one reason it became so influential. Ferritin is a spherical protein complex made of 24 units, heavy and light chains, assembled into a hollow shell like a non-scale cage. Inside the hollow core, ferritin can store up to 4,500 iron atoms as ferric iron, usually as a ferrihydrite-like mineral. The number more than 4,000 iron atoms inside a single protein molecule is extraordinary in biological terms. Just compare: hemoglobin carries 4 iron atoms per molecule. Transferrin carries 2. Ferritin can store 1,000. This enormous storage capacity is precisely what impressed researchers and led them to conclude that ferritin must represent iron stores. By the late 20th century, especially in the 1980s and 1990s, when structural biology advanced, the high-resolution studies of ferritin became available. Scientists fully appreciated how sophisticated this molecular structure is. The image of ferritin is a highly organized iron nanocage, reinforced the assumption that measuring ferritin would reflect total body iron. But there's a key point: the structural capacity of ferritin does not automatically mean that serum ferritin concentration equals total iron stores in a simple linear way. That leap from molecular storage capacity to clinical measurement dogma is where the story becomes complicated. The real turning happened in the early 1970s. Ferritin was first isolated back in 1937 from horse spleen. Through the 1950s and 1960s, understanding of its role in iron handling expanded. Then in 1972, reliable assay for measuring serum ferritin became available, and in the period from roughly 1973 to 1975, influential publications, including work by Jacobs and Warwood, proposed that serum ferritin concentration correlates with total body iron stores. From there, a powerful simplification entered medicine. Serum ferritin reflects body iron stores, and that statement became a clinical dogma. It was extremely attractive because it provided a single blood test, was measurable, and a simplified diagnosis. But ferritin is primarily intracellular. Serum ferritin represents a small fraction that leaks or is secreted into circulation. Its level reflects multiple signals, not only iron quantity. One of the most important modern understanding is this: ferritin is an acute phase reactor. It can rise with chronic inflammation, infections, autoimmune disease, kidney disease, liver injury, malignancy, and metabolic disorders. So high ferritin levels are not automatically great iron stores, and they are not automatically normal. It may be a signal that something inflammatory or systemic is happening. At the same time, low ferritin does not automatically mean danger, and it does not automatically mean anemia. Interpretation matters. Now let's talk about iron deficiency, because it is not one single story. There is an absolute true deficiency, often from blood loss, severe malnutrition, or real malabsorption. And there is a functional deficiency when iron is present but not properly available or used. True deficiency can occur with heavily bleeding, but even then, iron is not the whole story, because with bleeding, you lose more than just iron: proteins, folate, B12, and blood volume itself. In pregnancy, another common confusion appears. Many women are told they have anemia. What they often have is physiological hemodilution. Plasma increases, so concentration look lower. That is not automatically iron deficiency anemia. And ferritin references ranges in pregnancy are not as straightforward as people assume. And yes, malabsorption can cause deficiencies, especially after duodenal surgeries, but terms like leaky gut, loosely and commercially, thermal absorption usually affects multiple nutrients, not only iron. Now a few words about symptoms and this phrase hidden anemia. Fatigue, dizziness, hair loss, these are non-specific. One doctor says iron, another says vitamin D, and third says take everything. That is not good medicine. The phrase hidden anemia is also not a precise medical diagnosis. Anemia has well-defined criteria and many types. If we don't know the cause, we should say so, not label it hidden. A complete blood count gives us real clues. We look at red blood cell size, hemoglobin content, and other ingredients. Microcystic hypochromic cells can point towards iron-related pattern. Microcytosis often points to B12 or folate deficiency. Hemoglobinopathies are the different category entirely and are not fixed by iron. Now, you will often hear specific ferritin cutoff repeated as if they were the absolute truth. For example, 12-15 nanograms per milliliter, or sometimes 30 nanograms per milliliter. These numbers became popular because they were convenient and because they came from older population data and older definitions used mostly in epidemiology. Some groups later suggested higher threshold to catch early deficiencies, but several important points must be set clearly. Those cutoffs are not based on a true gold standard measurement of total body iron, because we do not have a direct, universally applicable method to measure total body iron stores in living humans. Much of the old validation relied on correlations with the bone marrow iron staining, and even that has limitation. These thresholds do not perfectly predict symptoms, outcomes, or respond to treatment. Ferritin is influenced by inflammation, metabolic state, liver function, and chronic disease. Even low-grade inflammation can raise ferritin and mask deficiency, and there is no universal agreed upon outcome-based ferritin level that defines deficiency across all populations and physiological states. Pregnancy, chronic disease, obesity, and aging all change interpretation. So the accurate position is not one number proves everything. The accurate position is that ferritin can be useful, but it is never the whole story. It should be interpreted in a conjunction with hemoglobin, red blood cells, transferrin saturation, clinical context, and when relevant inflammatory markers. And now we arrive to one of the most important questions of all, and I love this question, because this is where we move from dogma to science. People ask, if ferritin is low in the blood, how do we know it is low in the liver, spleen, or other storage tissues? How can we prove it? The honest answer is that we cannot directly prove it, and in a living person without invasive procedures. What we have is indirect evidence. Historically, the closest thing to a direct method was bone marrow iron staining with Prussian blue. A bone marrow sample is taken and examined under the microscope to see whether iron granules are present in macrophages. This method was used decades ago to validate ferritin as a marker of storage, but it is invasive, samples only one compartment, depends on interpretation, and does not precisely qualify total body iron. So even so-called gold standard is imperfect. In the 1970s, researchers compared serum ferritin levels with the bone marrow iron staining. They found the very low serum ferritin often correlates with the absence of iron in bone marrow macrophages. From that statistical association, it was concluded that low serum ferritin levels reflects depleted iron stores, but correlation is not identity. What was demonstrated was a relationship, not a direct measurement of total liver or systemic storage iron. So why does low serum ferritin usually suggest low storage? Ferritin production inside cells depends on the intracellular iron availability. When iron within cells is truly depleted, ferritin synthesis decreases, and less ferritin appears in circulation. In stable non-inflammatory conditions, this relation holds reasonably well. But what does not mean serum ferritin equals total body ferritin? It means serum ferritin often correlates with storage under certain physiological conditions. And this assumption becomes fragile in many common situations. Inflammation increases ferritin independently of iron stores. You can have low iron availability and still have normal or high ferritin. Liver disease can release ferritin into the blood. Metabolic syndrome and obesity can raise ferritin through low-grade inflammation. Acute illnesses can also elevate ferritin, so high ferritin levels do not reliably indicate high storage. What about low ferritin? Extremely low ferritin, for example, very low single-digit value, rarely occurs when significant storage iron is present. But even here, we rely on indirect inference. We cannot directly measure liver ferritin in routine practice, nor can we precisely quantify total storage iron without advanced imaging or invasive tests. So, the scientifically honest statement is not we proved liver iron is low. The honest statement is, based on physiological mechanism and correlation studies, very low serum ferritin can suggest depleted storage compartment when confounding factors such as inflammation are absent. This is a probabilistic conclusion, not absolute proof. Modern methods like MRI can measure liver iron concentration more directly, but these are mainly used in iron overload disorders, not routine deficiency evaluation. And even MRI shows imperfect correlation with serum ferritin in complex conditions. The older dogma was simple. Ferritin shows iron stores, and the more accurate modern understanding is that serum ferritin is a surrogate marker that often correlates with storage iron in stable physiological states. Still, it is not a direct measurement and is influenced by multiple biological processes. So can we strictly prove that low ferritin equals low storage? No. Not in a fully organic, specific, direct way without invasive or advanced imaging techniques. We rely on physiological reasoning, correlation studies, bone marrow comparison, and clinical context. The intellectually honest position in this, we infer storage status from serum ferritin using, and here is what I want to take from this. Ferritin is not everything. It's one marker, and it must be interpreted carefully in context. I will continue the topic of iron and more broadly how medical myths are created and sustained. If you like my video and the way I explain complex things in a calm, evidence-based way, please leave comments and suggest topics. Many gynecological topics are really covered. If you want a full deep dive with sources, that's exactly what the ferritin tab is for. And finally, this is also about thinking. I'm not here to force you to agree with me, but if you want to learn something new, your mind has to remain open. I will listen, I will reflect, and I will decide. Information should not be absorbed through fear. Fear makes people lose control. Repeated fear creates the feeling that everyone is sick, and that is how mass medical myths grow. I'm not here to frighten you. I want the information to land calmly. You reflect, you accept it, or you don't. You believe it or you don't, but you think. That's probably all for today. I wish everyone a good day. Support the channel if you can and want, and most importantly, stay healthy.